Good afternoon to all of those who are in the East Coast. Good morning to those in the Central and Pacific time zones. We have a fascinating speaker today. Together with Major General Nadav Padan, we have Arsen Ostrovsky, who's really a world-renowned civil rights attorney. And he's dealing with a number of issues, what we in the vernacular call lawfare, whether it's the Red Cross, ICC issues, United Nations issues. It's something that he's made a career of, and there's a coalition of attorneys across the globe that are dealing with this under Arsen's lead. He serves as the CEO of this group. But right now, in the context of this war, things are even more significant than ever. And he's a fascinating person, extremely articulate. And what I'd like to ask of each and every one of you, after you hear Arsen, those who couldn't listen live because it's the middle of the day, they'll be getting the email this evening. But please forward the email of Arsen speaking and of Major General Padan. Forward that email to friends, to colleagues, because this is really an angle that we've never dealt with in the course of these briefings. It's the first time that we're delving into this issue. And without further ado, our special guest, Arsen Ostrovsky.
Steve, thank you so much for that introduction, and indeed, first of all, for all the incredible work that FIDF is doing, because we are in for a long battle, and we will need all the support we can get, both for our soldiers on the ground here and for Israel in the United States as well. So all the work that you guys are doing, it's certainly felt. It's deeply appreciated, and for that, we're certainly very grateful to see you as an indispensable, really, partner in the effort. As you said in the introduction, I'm a human rights lawyer. I have and continue to proudly serve my nation, our people. But you know what? I'm also a father of two young daughters, and the oldest of who is not yet 7, and who came to me the other night and said, "Abba, I had a bad dream." And I know exactly already what their dream was. She says, "Abba, I dreamt that the bad guys took me. They took me to Gaza." We teach children that monsters exist only in books, but the reality is that they exist in real life. And as long as our hostages, our loved ones, remain in captivity in Gaza, they will continue to exist, and they will continue to exist until we return our hostages and eliminate Hamas from Gaza as well. Why do I say this? I say this because in so many ways we here are all affected one way or another. This is not a war in an abstract. We all know someone who's either been tragically killed, kidnapped, hurt, or who's missing. And I know you guys feel it too, both as passionate Zionists and as Jews in your own community, with your support for Israel and for the IDF. And I'm cognizant also of the fact that anti-Semitism, as a result of the war that Hamas launched against us, has surged in the United States, especially on campuses and in circumstances today which would have been one day unthinkable, but where calls for genocide of the Jewish people are now to be seen as something in context. I would suggest, or would say, it seems that overnight, somehow, everyone has become an expert in international law, in the Geneva Conventions, yet could hardly name to you one single article. Instead, what we have seen is a systematic and fundamental perversion of international law that has been weaponized as a tool to vilify Israel, to allow the masquerading of it as an excuse to engage in anti-Semitic behavior, and to portray Israel, and by extension IDF soldiers, as war criminals, as pariahs, as committing some of the most heinous crimes. That, of course, could not be further from the truth. There is only one side that is guilty here of committing international law violations, and that is not us. That is not Israel. That is Hamas, the Hamas ISIS terrorist group that initiated this unprecedented campaign, massacre against the Israeli people. We have seen crimes from every imaginable violation, from mass murder to rape to torture to mutilation to pillaging to indiscriminate rocket fire, to use of human shields, and of course, ultimately to taking of hostages as well. Every conceivable international law has been violated by Hamas. Ultimately, what they are doing is committing, quite frankly, a double war crime. They are hiding behind innocent civilians in Gaza whilst targeting indiscriminately civilians in Israel. That in itself is a double war crime. Golda Meir, who once famously said, she said many famous things, but she said, the world hates a Jew who hits back. The world loves us only when we are to be pitied. She said those words many, many years ago, but how true they ring today. We saw immediately in the wake of October 7th, the whole world really offer an eloquent message of support and solidarity and unity with Israel. But the second that we hit back, as any sovereign nation in the world would, United States, any EU country, as any nation would, automatically and reflexively, the international community was up in arms. Automatically, Israel's actions are disproportionate. Automatically, we are committing suddenly grave war crimes. The world recognizes Israel's right to self-defense, as if we should be somehow grateful for that. The most basic and fundamental, not just rights, but really obligations of any sovereign nation. But then when we exercise that right, as I said, automatically there is outrage, but specifically with respect to this charge of disproportionality, which seemingly, each time we fight back, each time our soldiers risk their own lives in order to save not just our lives, but civilian Palestinian lives, the world is somehow outraged that we didn't just simply lay down our arms and surrender. But we have to also ask, what is proportionality? And I think first, and it's important because these issues directly affect soldiers, IDF soldiers on the ground in their operational capabilities and in terms of their strategies. And I'll touch upon that a little bit later on as well. But firstly, we need to dismiss that proportionality is measured by some kind of perverse equivalence in casualties. It is not. If you kill 5 people, it doesn't mean that we can kill 5 people and that will be proportion. It does not work that way. It's not some kind of quid pro quo. But also we need to bear in mind that what can ever be a proportionate response when our children, women, loved ones, mothers, fathers, grandfathers have been literally mass executed, raped, mutilated, taken hostage? What can ever be proportionate response? But under international law, it is a very defined concept, including under the Rome Statute, under the Geneva Conventions, under the additional protocols as well. And quite simply, the doctrine of proportionality requires that any anticipated loss of civilian life, that it must not exceed the potential military advantage to be gained from such a strike. It recognizes that in war, there will always be civilian casualties, and that is tragic. However, in relation to Israel's current military operations, we have to be very clear. There is a very precise and definitive goal, and that is bringing our hostages back and eliminating Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization that seeks our destruction. To state the obvious, saving the lives of millions of people is legal, is just, and is moral under international law. Now, civilians will die, and that is tragedy. There will be collateral damage. That is a sad and tragic and inevitable outcome of war. However, whereas Israel does everything possible in order to mitigate civilian casualties, which no other army in the history of warfare, not the United States, not the UK, no army has ever gone to this kind of level of giving 2 weeks notice before you're about to hit a target, of making millions of phone calls, dropping leaflets, of creating safe passages. These are all now benchmarks in so many ways that Israel has put up for the rest of the world, including the US Army and others, to follow, a benchmark as to what a moral army of a democratic state, the kind of goals and standards you must set. Remember, in addition to all of that, we also have our lawyers and our military advocate general divisions that assess and determine every major strike like this, and in many cases will actually call them off, even though they are legitimate and legal operations, in order not to harm civilians. Whereas we know for a fact that Hamas has been using Palestinians as human shields, hiding behind civilian infrastructures. They've been shooting, in some cases, civilians trying to flee as well. So that's something that's important, that we understand that Israel's actions are entirely proportionate, and so far as there are civilian casualties, that is entirely the blame, in this case, of the Hamas, which puts them in harm's way. I wanted to touch also about hospitals, which is so important, and something that's been in the news so much. It's impossible not to look at images of hospitals, of these incubators of babies and the wounded and the sick being unable to receive treatment. It's a sacrosanct principle under the Geneva Conventions that civilian sites such as hospitals receive special protection, special status, meaning they are not allowed to be targeted. However, international humanitarian law also has some element of pragmatism, meaning it does recognize that there are circumstances where that is inevitable, and specifically when hospitals become military operations, when they're used by terror groups like we've seen with Hamas, when they build tunnels underneath, when they hide weapons, ammunition in MRI machines, in incubators, in the NICU, even that the images of Hamas hiding weapons there, they're using these places in command and control structures as weapons depots. That turns them into legitimate military targets. As tragic as that is, it's impossible not to feel empathy, but also a sense of outrage that Hamas would so cynically and perversely turn hospitals into targets. Now, we have to remember also, this doesn't give Israel carte blanche, for example, to do as we want. And it's important also to recognize that Israel has not, there's this conception that almost as if Israel is shooting at hospitals or throwing bombs. We're not doing anything of the sort. On the contrary, we're putting our own soldiers' lives at risk by going physically into these hospitals in order to root out the individual Hamas terrorists, so as to not cause any unnecessary loss of civilian casualties. There's a couple of other things I did want to touch on as well in terms of humanitarian aid as well. What are the rules when it comes to things like water, electricity, food? Insofar as those elements are concerned, we have to remember that whilst, yes, there is a humanitarian situation in Gaza, but it's entirely the doing of Hamas. There is no requirement in or obligation upon Israel in international law to provide humanitarian services, including supplies of food, water, and the like, to Gaza. However, we cannot prevent these services from entering, or these supplies from entering into Gaza, and nor can we institute a siege, which on itself is permissible under rules of war, but not if that is being used as a means to starve the local population. Now, we're either of those things. There are hundreds upon hundreds of humanitarian trucks coming to Gaza every day with supplies. We can be providing them more, were it not, quite frankly, and even as President Herzog said the other day, for the inefficiency of the United Nations mechanisms, which have to inspect these supplies as well. And also we need to bear in mind that Hamas continues to siphon humanitarian aid as well. And when it comes to things like electricity and fuel, the law there is quite different, precisely because electricity and fuel is used and weaponized by the enemy, by Hamas here, in order to power their tunnels, in order to provide fuel for rocket fire and for their command and control operations as well. So once again, Israel is not required to provide humanitarian aid, but we are doing everything possible in order to facilitate humanitarian aid. And insofar as the extent we are not, it is only with respect to fuel and electricity, although that we've started providing as well. But that, again, insofar as that is used by Hamas in order to power their weapons and command control mechanisms, for that we are not required to, nor do we. I'm mindful a bit of the time, so I wanted to really touch on another thing with respect to hostages, which is something that is so that is really so prevalent, that is overwhelming, that is impossible to neglect. It is everywhere. You know, I live in Tel Aviv. My office and my home is near the Hostage Square. I walk past it every day. We see posters every day. All of us know someone. We see the images. It is impossible not to be moved, whether we're here in Israel or in America. But it is also infuriating. It is also outrageous. You know, I don't have to tell you that the taking of hostages is a grave war crime under international law, under the Rome Statute, under the International Convention against the taking of hostages. And even when they are taken hostage, remember also, these are not prisoners of war. These are not soldiers. These are civilians, mostly civilians in any case. They are hostages. And even when they are taken captive, they are still afforded rights, all of which are being neglected here, once again, by Hamas. And we know that Hamas is a ruthless terrorist organization, does not abide by any kind of rules, norms, Geneva Conventions, or the rules of war. However, that does not absolve the Red Cross from their duty, from their mandate. The International Committee of the Red Cross, their very mission is to provide humanitarian relief, aid, and assistance to hostages. In the 80+ days that our loved ones have been held captive in Gaza, the Red Cross has not seen a single hostage. They have not provided a single proof of life. They have even rejected the pleas of the families of Israeli hostages to provide medicine. Can you believe that? The families of the hostages have pleaded to the Red Cross, our loved ones need medicine, whether it's asthma, heart conditions. Can you find a way to provide that to them? The Red Cross refused. They refused to even take this medicine. And the most outrageous thing, there was an interview with the president of the Red Cross just a few days ago, where she complained, in essence, by saying that their ability to function is constrained insofar as the parties can reach agreements on certain functions that allow them or can allow them to visit hostages and so on. But she then said that if only Israel were to meet some of the demands of Hamas, it would free up and make our ability for us to function easier. Can you comprehend that? She's actually saying, the president of the Red Cross is saying, if only Israel were to meet the demands of the very terrorist organization that massacred, butchered, burnt, raped, mutilated, and took our loved ones hostage, if only we were to meet their demands, as if this is some kind of two equals, which of course we are not. One is a liberal democracy and the other is a bloodthirsty ISIS-like jihadist terror group. Now, the Red Cross is an organization with a long history of abandoning the Jewish people in the Holocaust, and they're abandoning us again today. They have an unwavering commitment to neutrality, as they say, but the fact of the matter is they are unwaveringly absent when it comes to Israeli lives. They are unwaveringly absent. Their role having been relegated, quite frankly, to no more than an Uber driver or a taxi driver. That is not their function. They're meant to be in Gaza. They're meant to be insisting on seeing hostages. They're meant to be insisting on using every power at their disposal to provide medicine, to provide proof of life, to provide information as to the whereabouts, but they've simply given up, and that is the reality. But, you know, I have to tell you that, you know, it doesn't mean that we are powerless, and especially in the United States. The US is the primary funder of the Red Cross in 2022, having provided some, I believe, almost $700 million in funding. Perhaps Congress, and not just Congress, all those that do provide funding to the Red Cross, ought to be asking some questions, ought to be asking, where was the Red Cross the last 80 days? Why have they not seen a single hostage, provided any proof of life, or delivered any medicine? Or for that matter, where was the Red Cross when Hamas terrorists used Shifa Hospital and all these other hospitals in Gaza as their terrorist bases? It cannot be that they operated these bases right under their noses and the Red Cross did nothing. So these are a lot of questions that need to be asked. At the end of the day, I think so much of, and I hope gave a bit of a glimpse, and I'm happy to take questions on this afterwards as well, is relevant to the soldiers, because Israel and by extension the IDF are already being framed as war criminals, guilty before any charges have even been laid, that we're some kind of pariah, that we're acting disproportionately, that we're intentionally targeting civilians. This all directly affects soldiers' capabilities, operational actions on the ground. There are already lists that have been drawn up including the 40 most senior IDF soldiers for possible war crimes actions. The International Criminal Court is already investigating the case of Israel and Palestine, so to speak. The ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan, was in Israel, I think only a few weeks ago. It is inevitable that the ICC will investigate this case, and they will investigate the actions of our soldiers, actions of war crimes, actions of disproportionality, actions of targeting civilians. NGOs in Europe and elsewhere around the world in friendly jurisdiction can launch private war claims. That will be a threat to our soldiers. We've already seen these kinds of actions with respect to people like former IDF Chief of Staff Bogi Ya'alon, Doron Olmog, and others. There may be international tribunals, such as the one we had with Yugoslavia, that may be framed against the IDF, and of course diplomatic action as well. But we need to be vigilant. We need to use every tool, every resource at our disposal to defend, not only defend the state of Israel and the IDF soldiers in the press, in the media, on campuses, in Congress, where we're talking about everything from aid to IDF, to Israel, to calls for ceasefires and so on. But we are in for the long haul, and this is something that we cannot do alone. We need your support. We need FIDF with us every step of the way, and I know we can rely and we can count on that. With that, perhaps Steve, I might end my remarks. I fear if I did go a little bit too far, I do apologize. But I did want to, with your permission, end with a very short clip. I hope it works. It is a clip of Shaul Greenlick, an IDF soldier who sadly fell in battle just yesterday. He was buried today. He's from Ra'anana. A few weeks ago, he was able to come home from the front to visit his family. This is a clip. I'd like you to look at it and bear with me for just another minute, if that works.
Thank you very much for sharing this.
The woman hugging him in that image is his mother, as if she knew, as if that mother's intuition. In the lyrics, there's a line there that says, "Imagine me falling into her arms." This is a song by Shlomo Artzi, in which he writes and sings about a longing for a beautiful and a peaceful world without sadness and pain. May we all see such a world in our time soon.
Thank you, Arsen. Particularly, thank you for the insights into what's happening with International Red Cross the insights in terms of what we could be looking at with the ICC, with other bodies. And you're in a very, very challenging place. But we know not only you, but there's a team of attorneys out there that stand for true justice, that stand for morality. And in a world which is unfortunately a very immoral world, we're honored to be associated with you and what you stand for. And thank you for sharing time with our participants, with our community. We're very grateful.
Thank you. Appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Thank you.